so that you do not disturb the proceedings. please stand as the ceremonial procession enters the hall, comprising of the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Colombo, the President of the Alumni Association, deans, professors, senior members of the academic community, and the other office bearers and members of the Alumni Association who will lead the orator, Dr. Shashi Tharoor. We now invite the following persons to take their seats at the head table. Professor Neluka Silva, Senior Professor in English from the Faculty of Arts. Mr. Rajiv Amarasuriya, Immediate Past President of the Alumni Association and Council Member of the University. Senior Professor H.D. Karunaratna, the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Colombo. And Mr. J.M.S. Bandara, the President of the Alumni Association, who will escort Dr. Shashi Tharoor, our orator. Please remain standing for the national anthem of Sri Lanka. Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, this is the 18th annual Sujata Jayawardene Memorial Oration organized by the Alumni Association of the University of Colombo. We now take a moment to recollect the past orations. Annual Sujata Jayawardene Memorial Oration was commenced in 2004 during the presidency of Mr. Tilak Karunaratne to recognize the immense services rendered by Alumni President, the late Mrs. Sujata Jayawardene. Since the inaugural oration conducted in 2004 and with 17 orations held over the years, the Sujata Jayawardene Memorial Oration has become an important feature in the annual calendar of the University of Colombo, where a topic of contemporary relevance and importance is presented by an expert in the area. The inaugural Sujata Jayawardene Memorial Oration was delivered in 2004 by Professor Chandra Wickramasinghe on the topic, Are We Alone in the Universe? A Socio-Scientific Analysis. The second oration, which was in 2005, was by Mr. Jayantha Dhanapala, who spoke on peace and development in Sri Lanka. Third oration, held in 2006, was delivered by His Excellency Robert O. Blake Jr. on the United States and Sri Lanka, Mutual Strategies in Development and Security. In 2007, the fourth oration was delivered by Judge C.J. Veeramatri on Traditional Global Wisdom on Environmental Protection. The fifth oration, which was in 2008, was by Vidyajyoti Professor Arjuna Aluvihara on the topic, Universities, Doctors and Society. Mr. Lalit Veeratunga delivered the sixth Sujata Jayawardene Memorial Oration in 2009 on the topic, Education, Where Do We Go From Here? Seventh oration was delivered by His Excellency Gotabaya Rajapaksa in 2010 on Development Plan for the City of Colombo. Honorable Mahinda Samarasinghe delivered the eighth oration in 2011 on Human Rights, International Challenges for Sri Lanka. In 2012, Dr. P.B. Jayasundara delivered the ninth oration on Challenges in Formulating the National Budget for 2013. Professor Sudarshan Seniviratne delivered the oration in 2013 on the topic Heritage Odyssey Sri Lanka, a visual narration unfolding the multifaceted personality of an island civilization. The 11th oration was by Professor Emeritus Carlo Fonseca in 2014 on the topic Religion, Philosophy and Science. The 12th oration in 2015 was by His Excellency Ranil Wickramasinghe on Strengthening Democratic Institutions. His Excellency Yi Jiang Ling delivered the 13th oration in 2017 on One Belt, One Road, Sri Lanka-China Relations. The 14th oration was delivered by High Commissioner His Excellency Taranjit Singh Sandhu in 2018 on Sabka Saath Sabka Vikas, Together We Progress, India-Sri Lanka Relations in the Light of India's Neighbourhood First Policy. Mr. Tony Veerasinghe delivered the 15th oration in 2019 on the topic Up in the Cloud, Using Artificial Intelligence and Digitalization to Transform Sri Lanka to a Developed Country. Amidst lockdowns and travel restrictions, the Alumni Association persevered to conduct the 16th oration in 2021 via Zoom on the topic, the COVID-19 Pandemic, the Way Forward Through Impactful Research by Professor Neelika Malavike. The 17th oration held last year in 2022 was by Deshamani Dr. Indrajit Kumaraswamy on the economic crisis, where are we and where do we go from here? And today we look forward to the 18th Sujata Jayawardene Memorial Oration by Dr. Shashi Tharoor, who will address the question, is expansion of BRICS a beginning of a new world order? To deliver the welcome address, I now call upon Mr. Rajiv Amarasuriya, immediate past president of the Alumni Association and grandson of the late Mrs. Sujata Jayawardena, on whose invitation our orator today has made a special visit to Sri Lanka to deliver the 18th Sujata Jayawardena Memorial Oration.
Orator this evening, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, ambassadors, leaders in government and opposition, judges of the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeal, Vice Chancellor, Senior Professor H.D. Karunaratne, former Vice Chancellors, past orators of the Sujata Jayawardena Memorial Oration, past presidents of the association, members of the Council and Senate, deans, the registrar, and the Bursa, and members of the academic staff, members of the family of the late Mrs. Sujata Jayawardena, distinguished invitees, my dear alumni, ladies and gentlemen. I extend a very warm welcome to all of you attending this 18th annual Sujata Jayawardena Memorial Oration of the University of Colombo. We are very pleased to welcome our distinguished orator, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, member of the Lok Sabha, one-time Under-Secretary General of the United Nations, and world-renowned speaker and author, who very kindly accepted our invitation to deliver this oration today. Today we will hear from Dr. Tharoor on his thoughts on whether the expansion of BRICS will be the beginning of a new world order. At this juncture, I would like to take a few moments to reflect on our nation's vibrant history in international relations. Sri Lanka, cradled in the embrace of the Indian Ocean, has always been a crossroads of civilization, a meeting point of cultures, and a bridge between nations. Our journey in the realm of global affairs is a testament to the indomitable spirit that defines us as Sri Lankans. Through the ages, we have navigated the seas of diplomacy, establishing enduring connections with the neighboring giants such as India and even China. The relationships have been shaped by mutual respect, shared heritage, and the recognition of our unique place in the mosaic of Asia. As proud Sri Lankans, we have extended our hand in friendship not only to our immediate neighbors, but also to nations far and wide, from the verdant landscapes of Europe to the bustling cities of the Americas. Sri Lanka's international standings etched with the principles of non-alignment, a stance that allowed us to contribute positively to global peace and harmony, particularly during the turbulent era of the Cold War. This legacy of non-alignment is a testament to our unwavering commitment to chartering an independent course in world affairs, guided by our own values and interests. Today, as we gather to delve in the theme, BRICS, a new world order, we do so with a profound sense of pride in our identity as Sri Lankans. The emergence of BRICS as a significant bloc in global affairs makes a pivotal moment in the evolution of the international system. It presents us with both challenges and opportunities that we, as a nation, must comprehend and engage with thoughtfully. The partnership between Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa heralds a new era, one that promises to reshape the contours of global politics, economics, and culture. As Sri Lankans, we stand at the threshold of this new world order, ready to contribute, learn, and prosper alongside our fellow nations. Let us approach the discourse on BRICS, a new world order, with a sense of purpose and unity. For our nation's history is intertwined with the destinies of nations near and far. Let us embrace this opportunity not only to learn from the experiences of BRICS nations, but also to share our own unique perspective and thoughts. In the grand tapestry of international relations, Sri Lanka's role is pivotal and our contributions are valuable. As we embark on this intellectual journey, let us carry with us the pride of being Sri Lankan, a people whose legacy stretches across millennia and whose future is boundless in its potential. Together as proud Sri Lankans, let us shape the course of our nation's destiny in this new world order, guided by the principles of wisdom, unity, and the unwavering spirit that defines all of us. So thank you, Dr. Tharoor. We are fortunate to have you in Sri Lanka delivering the 18th Sujata Jayawardena Memorial Oration. Before I conclude, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge and appreciation the individuals who have been instrumental in the success and continuity of this memorial oration in the past 2 decades. Whilst the idea of a memorial oration was first conceived by past President Mr. Tilak Karunaratne during his presidency in 2004, over the past 19 years, he, together with his successor, past President Mr. Ramani Amarasuriya, have provided leadership in holding this event, bolstered by the unstinted support of our executive committees in successive years. I must take this opportunity to thank the Vice Chancellor, Senior Professor H.D. Karunaratne, the Registrar, Mr. K.S. Edward, and the staff of the University of Colombo for the unstinted support and guidance provided. Also leadership of our President, Mr. J.M.S. Bandara, and the support and assistance of the other office bearers and members of the association in the arrangements today. In conclusion, I would like to thank all of you for your presence this evening and look forward to the 18th Sujata Jayawardena Memorial Oration to be delivered shortly. Thank you very much.
May I now call upon the Vice Chancellor of the University of Colombo, Senior Professor H.D. Karunaratne, to address the gathering.
Very good evening. Dr. Shashi Tharoor, Member of Parliament of India and former State Minister for Human Resource Development and External Affairs, for past President of Alumni Association of University of Colombo, present President, other distinguished invitees. It gives me great pleasure and honor to address you in this evening. This is a very important event for the University of Colombo. This is 16th year we are having this oration. I hope that all past presidents of the Alumni Association, they have done marvelous contribution to the University of Colombo. And today, the University of Colombo is the premier institute in Sri Lanka. There are 19 entities within the University of Colombo, 10 faculties. Recently, you may know that the Faculty of Indigenous Medicine added to the University of Colombo as the 10th faculty, and we have 6 institutes and 1 campus and 1 school of computing. So this 19 institute together, this time we know, particularly in year 2023, we became the number 1 in all 3 indices, Webometric Index, Times Higher Education Index, as well as QS ranking. So according to that, the University of Colombo is the number 1 premier institute in Sri Lanka. We have 42,000 students today. There are 16,000 undergraduate students, 11,000 postgraduate students, and 15,000 external and distant learning students. There are about 425 programs we are conducting for all these learning partners. So as the forerunner in higher education institute in Sri Lanka, we are doing very well. So I should thank for all the academia and particularly Alumni Association of the University of Colombo. In recent past, many scholarship programs we could implement because of the contribution made by the Alumni Association. So we believe that particularly we know Ms. Sujata Jayawardena contributed significantly to the student welfare and establishing a particular hostel as the Sujata Jayawardena Memorial Hostel. So in this 18th oration, we have to acknowledge all these support given by not only the Ms. Sujata Jayawardena, family members, and particularly we know the past president, Mr. Rajiv, is now in the council of the University of Colombo. So he's contributing a lot to the development of the University of Colombo. So without taking much time, I should thank all who worked hard to make this 18th oration as the successful oration. Thank you very much.
A big thank you from the Alumni Association to the sponsors and event partners, Multiform Chemicals Private Limited and Marlboro, the hospitality partner, Cinnamon Grand Colombo, and also the alumni corporate partners, Lanka Oryx Leasing Company and Akbar Brothers, for their continued support in conducting the activities of the association. As you heard today, the Alumni Association has had a record of 17 orations since 2004 in the name of past President Mrs. Sujatha Jayawardena in honor of her loyal services to the university. I can, as her granddaughter, confidently testify to the energy, commitment, and unwavering persistence with which she pursued these activities. I have many memories of her surrounded by piles of letters strewn across the dining table and of her busily addressing these to practically everyone she knew to seek funds for the hostel project. She also had a knack for recruiting her family members, me being a regular candidate, to sit by her and assist with pasting the envelopes. At that time, as a young child, she convinced me that I was doing something of significant importance for a great institution that is called the University of Colombo. Therefore, more than 25 years since her demise, it is very touching to note that the memory of this very deep-seated and genuine loyalty she had towards her alma mater lives on through these orations delivered by the lineup of our remarkable orators. Yet again today, we have another eminent person who is admired the world over to deliver the 18th Sujatha Jayawardena Memorial Oration. Aside from his many accomplishments, he has sometimes been referred to fondly as the unofficial English teacher of his motherland, India. So what better person to introduce him today than Professor Neluka Silva, Senior Professor in English of the University of Colombo, who, as I understand, is also very familiar with his writings. So over to you, Professor Silva.
Dr. Tharoor, Senior Professor H.D. Karunaratne, Vice Chancellor of the University of Colombo, President of the Alumni Association, Mr. Bandara, members of the Executive Committee of the Alumni Association, deans and rectors of the University of Colombo, council members, ladies and gentlemen. When I was asked whether I could introduce Dr. Shashi Tharoor, I was quite amazed because I never thought that I would actually get the opportunity to introduce an author who I had studied and whose work I have admired for a very long time. So it is really a tremendous privilege for me to introduce our distinguished speaker this evening. Dr. Shashi Tharoor, a midterm member of parliament for Thiruvananthapuram, is the best-selling author of 24 books, both fiction and non-fiction, besides being a former Under-Secretary General of the United Nations and a former Minister of State for Human Resource Development and for External Affairs in the Government of India. His novels, especially the great Indian novel, which I had the privilege to study in depth, are thought-provoking satirical commentaries on post-independence India, which really makes you think about the role of an author. Dr. Tharoor's ability to interweave humor into some of the most momentous events of history and legend is remarkable. He has won numerous awards, including the Pravasi Bharatiya Samman, a Commonwealth Writers' Prize, and the Crossword Lifetime Achievement Award. In 2019, Dr. Tharoor was also awarded the Sahitya Akademi Award in the category of English Nonfiction for his book, An Era of Darkness. He chairs Parliament's Standing Committee on Chemicals and Fertilizers and has previously chaired the Standing Committee on External Affairs and the Committee on Information Technology. I am now honored to invite Dr. Tharoor to address this gathering and deliver the 18th Sujata Jayawardena Memorial Oration on the topic, Is Expansion of BRICS the Beginning of a New World Order? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Silva. Distinguished ambassadors, leaders in the government and the opposition, judges of the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeal, Vice Chancellor, Senior Professor Karunaratne, former Vice Chancellors, President of the Alumni Association, Mr. Bandara, past President of the Association, Mr. Amarasuriya, members of the Council and Senate, members of the academic staff, the faculty, members of the family of the late Mrs. Sujata Jayawardena, distinguished invitees, alumni of the University of Colombo, ladies and gentlemen, friends. I hope that covers everybody. It really is a great pleasure to join this distinguished gathering and to have the honor of delivering the 18th annual Sujata Jayawardena Memorial Oration. My thanks to the organizers for giving me the immense privilege to address you on this occasion, and for the opportunity through this platform to offer my own humble tribute to the late Mrs. Sujata Jayawardena, who, though I never had the privilege of meeting her personally, upon reading of her life, I must say that rarely does one come across such a personality of her caliber, versatility, and breadth of interests. An exceptional dancer in Bharatnatyam and various other styles, a gifted actress on stage and screen, a skilled TV presenter, a dedicated conservationist, and a passionate social advocate, she donned multiple hats, while also being, I'm told, a model wife and mother. Yet what truly stands out to me is her compassionate concern for her fellow citizens and her strong sense of social responsibility. Her community service, organizing several fundraising projects for charities, including the Cancer Society, Deaf and Blind, and others, are well known. What is perhaps closest to this institution itself is the key role she played in the construction of hostel facilities for university undergraduates, especially for girls, which would have facilitated their learning, especially for those coming from distant places. And I've been told that the hostel complex, now named after her, accommodates over 550 women undergraduates, and therefore it's a particular pleasure to be here saluting this beacon of inspiration and to follow in the footsteps of several good friends, notably the late and much lamented Jayanta Dhanapala, who was a very good friend for many years, and Professor Sudarshan Senevaratne, who is also here and is a former orator himself. Now, my theme today, which was given to me by the organizers, I hasten to add, this is not some sort of New Delhi-centered Big Brother conspiracy coming to lecture to you. He asked me whether I would address the expansion of BRICS as the possible beginning of New World Order. And let me say that it is a plurilateral grouping that has seen its fair share of highs and lows over the past 2 decades. There was a time when BRICS, the partnership of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, was jokingly dismissed by some as the only world body invented by a merchant bank, because the term BRIC was coined by Jim O'Neill, chief economist at that time of Goldman Sachs in 2001, in reference to Brazil, Russia, China, and India. But if one person took the joke seriously, it was President Vladimir Putin of Russia, who suggested in 2006 that the 4 countries should meet regularly. The grouping was soon formalized, and nobody has looked back since. South Africa joined in 2011, solidifying the BRICS presence across the global south, with only Russia in the geographical north. Today, the 5 member states are increasingly being taken seriously as significant players in global affairs. The bloc met for its annual Leaders' Summit in Johannesburg, South Africa in August, with the highlight of the 15th summit being the agreement to admit 6 new member countries: Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates in alphabetical order, who will officially join the grouping in January 2024. The expansion of the BRICS into a BRICS Plus format with 11 members and the adoption of guiding principles, standards, and procedures for them has potentially made the BRICS, unless they decide not to retain the name, a more attractive institution for consensus building and dialogue in the developing world. There were some worries that expansion was largely directed by China and would seek to make the grouping more of an anti-Western forum, but most of the new members do not fit such a description. Are they a forum of the global south then, except for the presence of the decidedly northern Russia? Could the collective entity they represent prove a major force, with a host of other countries scrambling for BRICS membership? Or might the 11 countries be far too strained by their own contradictions to constitute an effective new political configuration? Furthermore, what does the expansion mean, when not long ago there were even questions about whether there was enough sustained interest within the original BRICS to stick together? The issue had come up in my own work as then chairman of India's Parliamentary Standing Committee on External Affairs in the context of the BRICS Parliamentary Forum that the Russians proposed during their chairmanship of BRICS in 2015, which elicited some skepticism in my own country. What on earth could India's fractious and rumbustious Lok Sabha, with its impassioned debates and disruptions, have in common with China's decorous NPC, a rigorously controlled echo chamber for Communist Party decisions? The natural corollary of this was to question whether BRICS even possesses a strong enough basis for cooperation. Do we have enough of a common agenda to build on across the board? Some observers argue that it's only a negative coalition of states that cannot agree on a common position, but can create a consensus on what they oppose, and that it's growing in number to avoid sanctions and protectionist measures against themselves. However, judging this movie by the old scripts of the Cold War era would, in my view, be a grave error, largely because the constancy of traditional partners has changed and we are now in a different world. BRICS in its original embodiment was identified as those nations whose rapidly growing economies were challenging the size and preponderance of the G7. Indeed, in the last 15 years, Brazil, Russia, and India have caught up with the smallest G7 economy, Italy, in terms of nominal GDP. India, in fact, is ahead in nominal terms of everyone except the US, China, Germany, and Japan. And in purchasing power parity terms, of course, India is now the third largest economy in the world after the US and China. After the expansion, the group now accounts for 40% of the world population and 13% of the world's GDP. The BRICS Plus expansion will increase the bloc share of nominal global GDP, weighted for purchasing power parity, to 37%, compared to just 30% for the G7. In other words, BRICS Plus represents a larger chunk of the global economy than the G7, which was supposed to be the club of the richest countries in the world. The expansion thus signifies a growing alignment of geopolitical and economic agendas within the BRICS. It now incorporates major global oil producers, near crucial trade choke points, such as the Suez Canal and the Strait of Hormuz and Bab el-Mandab Strait. India, Iran, and Russia are already developing the international north-south transport corridor. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, two of the world's largest oil and gas exporters, supply most of China's energy imports. And simply put, they're taken altogether far too big to be ignored, both individually, of course, but in particular together. But what is it that draws the BRICS close as nation states in their organized rebellion against the global order? As it happens, one major attribute all BRICS members share is their exclusion from the places they believe they deserve in the existing world order. Being denied legitimate positions on the global stage by today's dominant powers is proving to be a very strong glue that holds the grouping together and at some level causes them to look for alternatives to the existing world order. The refusal to be drawn into a contest of competing global powers is a general perception in the global south that should not be underestimated. Western countries need to understand that the BRICS Plus will continue as a loose grouping, heterogeneous in its membership, but with high aspirational dimensions, seeking to expand its practical capabilities for other countries around the globe. The key player, as well as key concern, of course, is China, whose economic output far outstrips the other members and whose role will be determinant in BRICS' global effectiveness. After decades of an almost isolationist approach to world politics, China has been stretching its sinews on the world stage. Its economic interests span the globe, and Beijing seems to see merit in complementing these with an expanding array of partnerships with other countries. Some of these are unilaterally led, like its revival of the ancient land and maritime Silk routes as a platform for Chinese trade and investment under the Belt and Road Initiative. But Beijing is also showing increasing interest in multilateral engagements with like-minded nations, partially to compensate for not having the role it believes it deserves in existing institutions like the World Bank and the IMF. China's economic prowess has led analysts to view the expansion of the BRICS as a reflection of the grouping becoming a handmaiden of Chinese interests. We must be careful before accepting this argument at face value, or really any value at all. Although the democracy and human rights records of several of the new invited members are relatively far from ideal, the formation of BRICS Plus is more than a mere political maneuver to advance China's vision of international order. And if Beijing wants to build a bigger anti-Western tent, it can't do it by adding so many friends of the United States inside it. Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE are close US security partners. Even if they have their differences with Washington on some issues, they're unlikely to abandon US security guarantees for untested Chinese promises. All the BRICS Plus members and the future group of partner countries have their own agendas, and the BRICS Forum is one of the various platforms on which member countries try to promote their vision of the world, especially for their participation with better conditions in the global economy. In his address to the Johannesburg summit, Chinese President Xi Jinping called on BRICS nations to practice true multilateralism, I'm quoting here, and reject the attempt to create small circles or exclusive blocs, unquote. Well, India is already part of at least two such small circles. One is the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, or Quad, with Australia, Japan, and the United States. The other is the I2U2 Forum that joins India with Israel, the UAE, and the United States. In Johannesburg, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi even called for resilient and inclusive supply chains, an obvious euphemism for reducing economic dependence on China. So if China sees BRICS as a forum for expanding its role in the global south, so does India. And for that matter, so do the Saudis and the Emiratis, who are willing to deploy large chunks of the capital they've accumulated over decades for economic and political gain in Africa and beyond. But as an Indian parliamentarian myself, let me speak from an Indian perspective. India, for its parts, realizes that BRICS and its future expansion would be futile if it were to reduce itself to a platform that merely mirrors the conflict between Washington and Beijing. Nor can it be allowed to resemble an echo chamber of the Sino-Russian axis. New Delhi is also in a unique position to prevent this. Given its own strategic aspirations, goodwill with Washington, and legacy with South Africa and Brazil, India has the potential to be the stabilizing factor that makes the future of BRICS brighter than its problematic past. In the process of revitalizing this plurilateral grouping, India can also pursue its core interests, engaging with the global south, fostering mutually beneficial multilateral cooperation, and using the West's efforts to meet its security and development needs to constrain Chinese influence in the region. The enlargement of the BRICS from a group of 5 nations to 11 could lead to increased influence for both India and the collective body. This is because the expanded coalition encompasses a higher proportion of energy-producing countries, and BRICS expansion could give India more clout with a set of nations with which it is keen to expand relations. Additionally, the member countries are likely to leverage the expansion to advocate for reforms within the United Nations and other global institutions. New Delhi's stand of settling the accession criteria on agreed terms and then proceeding gradually is a sensible move, and its influence is reflected in some of the new admissions. As other countries clamour to join, the question of how far expansion can go without making the forum too unwieldy to be effective will arise. New multilateral groups could arise within the BRICS membership. One already exists in the form of IPSA, essentially the initial BRICS minus Russia and China, which is focused exclusively on South-South cooperation. IPSA could prove a worthy counterweight, preventing the criteria for new members from being set on Chinese terms. All three countries have shown their willingness to revive IPSA, and guaranteeing and safeguarding their strategic autonomy in a newly rejuvenated BRICS Plus provides them with more impetus to do so. Since I'm not in government and speaking in a purely personal capacity, let me be frank. There is no doubt, in my view, that a strong and determined Indian presence in a rejuvenated BRICS Plus will ensure it does not become a vehicle of Chinese maneuvering. India is in fact the best insurance the world can have of China-proofing the BRICS. India's interest in an equitable BRICS expansion, its desire to not let it be perceived as an anti-West grouping, as well as its broader strategic affinities with Washington, make it the best guarantor that BRICS will not evolve into a pole of hostility to the democratic West. But there is still the broader challenge of global governance. I used to joke that the words global governance were rather like the British talking about the weather. Everyone mentions it, but no one plans to do anything about it. And that's essentially the experience most of us have. Now, although BRICS Plus has not elaborated on a model of global governance, they are emerging at a time when the future of the international system that arose in the immediate aftermath of World War II is increasingly being called into question. After 2 world wars, numerous civil wars, colonial oppression, and the horrors of the Holocaust and Hiroshima, the far-sighted statesmen of the mid-1940s decided that liberal internationalism based on the UN Charter and allied institutions was the only way to prevent more carnage. Indeed, for over 7 decades, that system has largely achieved its goals. It broadly ensured world peace and prevented a third world war, although at the cost of shifting many conflicts to the global periphery. And it did not benefit only the developed world. It also ensured decolonization, promoted development, and found ways to accommodate the voices of newly emerging countries, even if it has not always accommodated their aspirations. There is increasing concern that these countries have now hit a glass ceiling within the international system. COVID-19 inaugurated an era of deglobalization, with the world embracing isolationism and protectionism more enthusiastically than prior to the outbreak. There was a rush to reset global supply chains and raise trade barriers. The demand arose for more protectionism and self-reliance, for bringing manufacturing and production value chains back home, or at least closer to home. The words nearshoring and friendshoring were invented in Washington. All of this consolidated what I see as the 4 crises that plague the current structures of global governance. The first is the crisis of legitimacy, a manifestation of how the current structures of the world order have left out a large section of the world's population. Consider how the West European and Others group, WEOG, in the United Nations General Assembly, comprising of 28 member countries, including the US, Canada, Israel, Australia, holds more than 50% of the total voting power on the Security Council. The African group of 54 member countries from the African continent owns only 13% of the total voting power. Similarly, in the International Monetary Fund, the combined voting power of the United States, Japan, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom is 38.8%, while the combined voting power of African countries is only 3.2%. The second is the crisis of sovereignty, where on the one hand, many post-colonial nations cling tightly to their hard-won sovereignty as do some developed countries like the US. On the other hand, countries and blocs like the EU and the African Union are much more willing to cede some sovereignty in order to gain collective benefits, including bargaining power in international negotiations. The third crisis is the crisis of the collective, where nations are rushing to cook up alphabet soups from RIC to BRICS and from G20 to G77, while simultaneously many of these nations are at odds with each other bilaterally. As sovereignties were reasserted across the world and treaties and trade agreements increasingly questioned during the pandemic, multilateralism, the once taken for granted mantra of international cooperation, was questioned. It was already in danger of being eroded before the pandemic. Britain withdrawing from the European Union, America leaving the landmark Paris Climate Agreement being glaring examples. More recently, this was seen in the failure of the finance ministers of the G20 to reach a consensus in framing a joint communique, though the final G20 summit did achieve agreement on one. The fourth is the crisis of identity, which refers to the cultural and economic backlash against globalization, which is ironically a phenomenon meant to bring us closer together. And that has marked the period of world affairs since 2008. Maybe the angst of developing countries towards economic elites in their country, in developed countries towards economic elites in their country working to benefit elites in countries other than their own, or people resenting cosmopolitanism and herding behind chauvinistic and purportedly more authentic variants of nationalism, globalization is no longer as cool as it once used to be. The British writer David Goodhart captured this dilemma as a battle between the anywheres, the globalist elite who can flit from five-star hotel to business class lounge to international conference and global audience, and the somewheres who are firmly anchored in a particular place, particular religion, a particular ethnicity, particular language, the target audience of global populace. The BRICS have demonstrated in their demand for greater clout and in their willingness to explore a smaller grouping, to pool in their resources and push for a new order that existing arrangements are simply no longer adequate for. Some observers have seen BRICS as an alter-West rather than an anti-West platform, implying that the group will expand the space of interaction by bypassing the Western world and do so without the participation of Western countries. In essence, each of the BRICS states is free to develop its relations with the United States and Europe without harming its relations with the BRICS states or undermining collective BRICS initiatives. Current and future BRICS members have one thing in common. They reject the right of the United States and the European Union to call all the shots and to impose restrictions on other countries' foreign policy and economic activities. It is apparent, however, that even in the original BRICS grouping, all five nations do not see all international issues in the same perspective, largely due to differences in the development models of the five countries. Trade, for instance, divides the group. While Brazil and Russia are commodity exporters, China is a commodity importer. In practice, the grouping's profound asymmetries, China's GDP is larger than all the other members combined, creates informal hierarchies. Geopolitics, too, divides the BRICS countries. China has a position in cybersecurity that opposes the positions of Brazil and India. China and Russia are suspicious of liberal ideas, wary of information technology, and decidedly unsympathetic to democratic dissent. India, Brazil, and South Africa are lively democracies. Brazil and South Africa are non-nuclear powers, in contrast to China, India, and Russia, which boast nuclear arsenals. India and China disagree on Pakistan's role in fomenting terrorism. And perhaps most seriously, China and India face an ongoing border conflict. Tensions between China and India that have surfaced periodically on several fronts, with the most shocking confrontation leading to a loss of 20 Indian soldiers' lives in Ladakh's Galwan Valley in 2020. India has lost access to 26 of 65 patrolling points in eastern Ladakh that both armies used to patrol in, and now the Chinese army has captured. The play-safe approach has turned areas that before April 2020 were accessible for patrolling by both sides into informal buffer zones largely under Chinese control, resulting in the loss of pasture lands for Indian shepherds at Gogra Hills, the north bank of Pangong Tso and Kokjung areas. But there have been other sources of friction as well between the elephant and the dragon. China has continued to oppose and continues to block India's entry into the nuclear suppliers group, a situation that has generated some concern, as you can imagine, in New Delhi. The issue of the activities of the Dalai Lama, who has enjoyed refuge in India since 1959, continues to be of concern to China, since the communist-ruled country is unable to accept that a democracy like India does not suppress his voice as Beijing would have liked. In turn, China's maneuvers in the Indian Ocean and its acquisition of port facilities in several of India's neighbors, notably Myanmar, the Maldives, Pakistan, and yes, Sri Lanka, have caused some alarm bells to ring in India. Similarly, India's growing and remarkably close relations with the United States, especially through the Quad and the I2U2, and the latter's Indo-Pacific rapprochement, have been viewed with considerable suspicion by both China and Russia. So the credibility of the grouping has also been threatened by these concerns and by political instability within the BRICS nations. A little more than a year ago, Brazil's infamously polarizing president, Jair Bolsonaro, lost elections and was replaced by the more conciliatory Lula da Silva. Yet most analysts expect Brazil's economic situation to worsen in the course of 2023, a trend that will likely increase public discontent. There's talk of Brazil's lost decade. GDP per capita has been all but stagnant since 2012. The anti-incumbency dynamic will perhaps continue to prevail in that country, leading perhaps almost inevitably to political instability. All of Brazil's presidents during the past decade either were impeached or faced acute risk of impeachment, and two actually were sent to jail. Since then, Brazil's executive branch has slowly lost power to Congress and the judiciary, a process that has turned the heads of the House of Representatives and the Senate into de facto prime ministers and raised worrisome questions about governability. In South Africa, different problem, but also a problem. We're seeing what is essentially a one dominant party democracy under President Ramaphosa, who came to power with a widespread hope that his administration would be able to rapidly deliver on his promise to revitalize the national economy and restore ethical business practices. Even as he started with an inquiry into high-level corruption and state capture, he has now himself become embroiled in multiple scandals that almost led to his own impeachment. The economic prospects are dwindling too. Reeling from a debt crisis, the country's GDP was only projected to grow 1.1% in 2023 and 1.6% in 24. Moreover, there is a significant risk that the ongoing energy crisis will lead to a recession in the not-too-distant future. With the new BRICS members, too, come new conflicts. Egypt and Ethiopia are fiercely at loggerheads over Nile waters, while Iran and Saudi Arabia are regional foes, notwithstanding the Beijing-brokered attempt to make peace between them. The bloodshed seen in the wake of the Israel-Hamas conflict has created more complexities that situate all Arab countries in a tinderbox of a neighborhood. Argentina, facing economic challenges and an impending contentious presidential election, has an uncertain political future. Iran's inclusion may make the bloc more assertive and vocal in its criticism of the West, targeting the US and Israel in particular, but these and other fault lines will be resisted by other members, and will make it much harder to turn the combined weight, economic, political, geopolitical, of the BRICS states into an influential force in world affairs. Given these differences, is it then possible for the members of BRICS Plus to truly adopt a common view on global macroeconomics, development issues, and international resource transfers? Difficult to answer. Now, in 2015, I was part of the first parliamentary forum in Moscow of the BRICS countries, and I found myself in intense conversations with my counterpart, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Chinese National People's Congress. Meanwhile, South African and Brazilian parliamentarians were swaying to Russian music before everyone went out on a cruise of the Moskva River. Before the meeting opened, many had wondered whether the five parliaments could possibly find common ground. I can tell you from personal experience that the parliamentarians got along very well indeed, and it was clear to everyone that we have great potential for dialogue and more. Add to this a set of values that looks at establishing new institutions of global governance on newer and fairer terms, and the BRICS may well serve as the indispensable instrument to pave the way ahead for a new system of global governance, for lack of a better word. But these countries face challenges not always addressed adequately by institutions that were designed by and remain dominated by the US-led West. For instance, BRICS has established a new development bank, headquartered in Shanghai and initially headed by one of India's most eminent private sector bankers, now succeeded by a Chinese. The New Development Bank, or NDB, which promises to become a major regional development bank, the first one without a single OECD country in its leadership, has the express purpose, of addressing the infrastructure needs of its member states. By 2026, NDB is looking to finance projects in 6 priority sectors, identified on the basis of the bank's lending mix during the first strategy cycle, the current focus of its member countries, the development challenges faced by them, and global trends. These include clean energy, energy efficiency, transport infrastructure, water and sanitation, environmental protection, social infrastructure, and digital infrastructure. The bank will also focus on a series of key considerations, namely climate change and disaster resilience, technology integration, and inclusiveness. NDB demonstrates that if the BRICS countries are not given their due at the existing global forums, such as the World Bank and the UN, they can consider very realistically bypassing them and planting the seeds of a new order. But do they all share the same sets of commitments and priorities? China's major priority remains a 57-member Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank, of which India and Russia, by the way, are the second and third largest stakeholders respectively, and to which Brazil and South Africa also belong. Since China will be the principal contributor to both institutions, is there any doubt as to which it will do more to bankroll? This is also where we need to deconstruct the growing clamor around de-dollarization. Leading up to the Johannesburg summit, there was speculation that, in a move towards reducing dependency on the dollar, the bloc would announce the setting up of a common currency. But they settled, understandably, for a less ambitious goal of encouraging trade in local currencies. Russia's 2024 presidency of BRICS is set to focus principally on using local currencies and payment systems, steered by discussions amongst finance ministers and central bank governors. There are many factors that have created hostility to the dollar in the developing world. The sanctions against Russia last year by impounding its foreign assets, punishment as they were, ignited fears amongst emerging economies that the US might capriciously use its outsized power, thereby impairing their economic security. Besides, over the last 2 decades, there have been several instances when emerging markets were held hostage to dollar volatility. America can borrow cheaply in global markets because the rest of the world needs dollar assets and is eager to lend to it. The world's grievance remains that it incurs an exorbitant cost to allow the US to perpetually live beyond its means without consequences. In theory, a BRICS common currency would shield the bloc from the perils of dollar hegemony. In practice, the project will remain a non-starter because of both politics and economics. It's inconceivable that member countries, not least India, would be willing to give up their monetary policy autonomy and become hostage to a common currency that would be vulnerable to instability anywhere in the bloc, for all the reasons I described earlier. Because of its outsized economic muscle, China would easily dominate BRICS and ipso facto the common currency's fortunes. No matter the rhetoric about a new world order, it would be ironic if, to escape the dollar's dominance, BRICS members succumb to the alternative of an authoritarian regime with a dubious reputation for institutional integrity, transparency, and rule of law. The second best option chosen by BRICS, trading in local currencies, is a less impressive way forward, but it's not an easy one. Local currency trade works best if bilateral trade between countries is roughly balanced. But if bilateral trade is structurally imbalanced, the surplus country would accumulate the trading partner's currency, which raises the ticklish question of how to settle that debt. If it has to be settled in dollars or another hard currency, the benefits of local currency trade will be largely neutralized. We seem to have hit that contingency with regard to paying for oil imports from Russia in rupees. Thus, if the BRICS countries want to avoid the dollar, the most likely alternative is the yuan because of China's vast trade footprint. Acquiescing, though, in a yuan-dominated system as the price for escaping from a dollar-dominated system is unacceptable and must be, from an Indian point of view, off the table. But sporadic conflict and turmoil aside, BRICS remains an alternative forum that can stand up to the dominant worldview of established economies, the principal ones of which merely happen to still dominate the global system because they were the founders of the post-Second World War global order, agreed at San Francisco, the UN conference, and at Bretton Woods, the creator of the World Bank and the IMF. The accusation that the West is arrogant towards the needs of the global South is serious. It cannot be answered by offering, quote, value-based partnerships, unquote, and, quote, a rules-based multilateralism, unquote, when the interest of the BRICS is focused on changing those rules in global finance, trade, and other standard-setting procedures. After all, the excluded countries are all too aware that in world affairs, you're either at the table or on the menu. They want nothing less than a seat at the high table and an equal role in being rule makers and not just rule takers. The BRICS nations might not have mattered in 1945, but this is 2023, and to ignore BRICS Plus is to ignore the turn of history. The story of the BRICS is not merely one of a group of states claiming a greater share of global power, it's also an effort to change the very underlying principles on which the global order is founded. The BRICS Plus countries have seized their geopolitical moment and called for a united stand of emerging and developing countries against a world order and practice of international politics that does not correspond to their needs and necessities. Russia's transgressions in Ukraine are seen as no different from the United States in Iraq and now Israel's in Gaza. The signs are clear that the global South is calling for a new form of open and inclusive multilateral cooperation, overlooking the political character and conduct of the partners. In modifying the outdated rules that guaranteed the disproportionate power of the somewhat oligarchic conglomerates that these global governance institutions had become, the BRICS have achieved a rare success. In all other cases, existing economic powers resist ceding control, and global governance largely remains in the hands of the few in a club that refuses to open its doors to new entrants, and indeed is reluctant even to open its windows to a breath of fresh air from elsewhere on the planet. But if the BRICS can weave a compelling soft power story, as it seems likely to do with the Global South narrative, championing the right principles and laying out a vision for a new world in this century, keeping those doors and windows sealed becomes impossible for the old guard of the world. The future of BRICS, understandably, will be determined by the institutions it creates. I've already referred to the new development bank, which in many ways is revolutionary. It's the first time that a group of emerging economies with varying political systems and structures, and which are geographically spread wide apart from each other, took up the mantle of development. And the terms on which they grow together, and the very promise of being able to grow together, will be, perhaps, the seed of BRICS' future triumph in the years ahead. It is important to note that countries like Brazil and India, unlike, say, Germany and Japan a century ago, are not seeking to overturn the world order, but to reform it. And perhaps there are lessons for the advanced West to take from their approach to seeking redress within the broad framework, rather than destabilizing the framework itself. Of course, whether the same is true of Putin's Russia is less certain, but that's a different subject. All that most of the BRICS countries want is a place at the high table, otherwise they feel they have no choice but to build their own table in their own image and in a different mold, channeling global relations through different routes than before. Basically, as countries acquire economic and military power, they start exercising their geopolitical muscle. The challenge for advocates of world order is to accommodate emerging powers within a framework of universal and stable rules and global structures that ensure everyone a fair deal, appropriate for their size, capabilities, and contributions to the international system. The leaders of the developed West will have to reconcile themselves to this and make way with grace instead of seeking to safeguard their entrenched privileges in a manner that will only undermine these institutions just because they are no longer in a position of privilege in these institutions. I will say that in some ways, the global system today reminds me of the internet, the World Wide Web. It is a somewhat confusing network, not the binary of the Cold War, but a network in which perhaps one country is connected to another on a particular example of India, our foreign minister meets every year with his Russian and Chinese counterparts in a grouping called RIC. Then, of course, they add the Brazilians and South Africans and they get BRICS. Then they add the Chinese but take out the Russians and they end up with BASIC for environmental negotiations. And then they will take out both the Chinese and the Russians and remain with the other three in IPSA for South-South cooperation. And India is a member of all these groupings, not merely because its name happens to begin with that most convenient element in every acronym, a vowel, which is indispensable for that purpose, but also because it has something to contribute to each of them and something to gain from each. That is essentially the way in which the world is increasingly working. Now, from this, what sort of world order will emerge? I don't know. Today's world leaders appear to lack the breadth of vision and the generosity of spirit of those who created the post-1945 world order. By clinging stubbornly to the system they dominate and barring the door to new entrants, they have left those outside little choice. Countries like China have shown through the BRICS New Development Bank that in the absence of a level playing field, they can build a different playing field. This would not augur well for all who wish to see one world on our planet and not two. I would argue that what the emerging powers are doing is not withdrawing from the world order as much as calling for a new design for global order. What that might mean is anybody's guess, but the signs point to the need to take BRICS Plus seriously and accommodate the global system to this important new entrant in world affairs. The challenges and opportunities presented by the BRICS Plus will test the BRICS cohesion and effectiveness, as I've already said. Its ability to remain a credible force for reshaping global governance will depend on its so far untested capacity to forge consensus amongst its diverse members. The BRICS space can be developed as a tool for diversifying the world and moving away from Western domination toward a far more genuinely multipolar order. But it could, of course, as I've hinted, also go terribly wrong. What I've been trying to do this evening in many ways is to try and paint a picture of a moving train. One knows broadly where the tracks are and where the train seems likely to go, but it is moving and no one can be quite sure if it may not find a chance of jumping on some other tracks to venture on. Still, you have a glimpse of where one observer sees it heading today. Tomorrow, the train may take a turn towards an unexpected new destination. Till then, we can only watch where it's going, and for those of us on board, let's hope we will enjoy the ride. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tharoor. It's not a surprise that the Alumni Association had a surge in registrations this year, given your reputation as a fierce champion of the Global South who argues its case with persuasive eloquence. And once again today, you have lived up to that reputation, shedding light on a topic that has the potential to fundamentally reweave the region's political and economic tapestry. So thank you very much for that. The Alumni Association would like to thank you for accepting their invitation and making a special visit to Sri Lanka to deliver the 18th Sujatha Jayawardena Memorial Oration. The President of the Alumni Association, Mr. J.M.S. Bandara, will now make a presentation to Dr. Tharoor as a token of their appreciation. May I now call upon the Vice President of the Alumni Association, Suranjani Vikramaratne, to propose the vote of thanks.
Our guest speaker, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, ambassadors and high commissioners, government and political leaders, the Vice Chancellor, Senior Professor H.D. Karunaratne, President of the Association, Mr. J.M.S. Bandara, immediate past President of the Association and Council Member of the University of Colombo, Mr. Rajiv Amarasuriya, past Presidents of the Association, members of the Council and Senate of the University of Colombo, deans and the academic community of the university, fellow members of the Alumni Association, ladies and gentlemen. It's my very pleasant task this evening to propose the vote of thanks on behalf of the Alumni Association of the University of Colombo. Firstly, I would like to thank our guest speaker, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, for accepting the invitation of our past president, Mr. Rajiv Amarasuriya, to travel to Sri Lanka to deliver the 18th Sujata Jayawardena Memorial Oration today. We thank you for taking 3 days from your busy schedule to come to Sri Lanka to deliver the oration. This evening, a packed audience of more than 500 attendees listened to Dr. Tharoor's erudite presentation on is expansion of BRICS a beginning of a new world order, a topic suggested by Mr. Tilak Karunaratne, our former president. It was very interesting to listen to your thoughts on how significant can these 5 emerging economies be in order to impact the global economy at a time of considerable geopolitical uncertainty. Thank you, sir, and we wish you all the very best in your future endeavors. We thank our Vice Chancellor, Professor H.D. Karunaratne, for his presence today. He has been supportive of the activities of the association and has tirelessly worked towards raising the bar of the undergraduates of the university since assuming office 1 year ago. Our special thanks go out to our past president, Mr. Tilak Karunaratne, for initiating this oration during his tenure as president of the association in honor of late Mrs. Sujata Jayawardena, who did yeoman service to the university. Thank you, Mr. Karunaratne, for your continued support and guidance extended to the association over the years. We also thank you for being a sponsor of today's event via your corporate Multiform Chemicals. We also thank past President, Mrs. Ramani Amarasuriya, for her continued support and guidance in organizing this oration. Our thanks go out to Marlborough for coming forward to be another sponsor of today's event, and Cinnamon Grand Colombo, our hospitality partner, and to host Dr. Tharoor's stay here. We are very grateful to alumni corporate sponsors, LOLC and Akbar Brothers, for supporting our annual activities this year too. We are grateful to our current president, Mr. J.M.S. Bandara, and immediate past president, Mr. Rajiv Amarasuriya, who have helped support today's event with a generous cash contribution. We are very grateful to all our sponsors and donors for supporting our oration this year. Your support helped us to conclude our 18th Sujata Jayawardena Memorial Oration successfully. We thank the deans, professors, and the academic staff for their presence today. We also thank Senior Professor Neluka De Silva for introducing our guest speaker. Dr. Santushi Amarasuriya of the Faculty of Medicine, University of Colombo, for conducting the ceremonies for this event. We thank you. We also thank the staff of the BMICH and Mount Lavinia Hotel for all the arrangements and the media for providing publicity for the oration. A special thank you to our own alumni for their participation and support. One of the primary objectives of our association is to encourage, foster, and promote close relationship between the university and its alumni and amongst alumni themselves. We do hope and trust that this oration has provided our membership and the alumni of our university this opportunity. Last but not least, let me thank all those present here this evening. We look forward to your continued participation at our events. Thank you.
The oration has now come to a close. The President and the Executive Committee of the Alumni Association request you all to please join them for fellowship and a cup of tea, which will be served in the lobby. We request you to please stand while the ceremonial procession leaves the hall.